That $4.7 billion takeover of the pork giant Smithfield Foods by China's Shenghua is generating a lot of buzz. The proposed deal faces regulatory scrutiny, and some consumer groups are not, shall we say, hog wild about the deal, amid what they say are food safety concerns. And here to debate the topic is Patty Lovera. She's the Assistant Director of Food and Water Watch, a consumer advocate group. And Rick Quinn is a principal at FDAimports.com, which advises Chinese companies looking to export to the U.S. and also works with American importers. Folks, welcome. Good to have you here. Patty, you say we think the deal should not be approved. What's worrying you?
So in the short term, Smithfield is the largest pork producer in the U.S. Any news that's going to make them bigger, we think, is worrisome for consumers and for U.S. farmers. Very short term, if they do as much exporting to China as they say they want to do, we're worried that prices could go up for consumers here. Longer term, we're worried about imports from China, and China is a country with a really very troubling food safety track record, and we're concerned that this is leading towards that eventual step.
And this company, Rick, in particular, has she characterizes it as a troubling track record. They were sanctioned some years ago for using a known carcinogen as part of their pork feed. Should we be worried? How do you respond to what Patty just said?
Thank you for the opportunity to be with you. It's a good question. The answer is that Shenghua is buying quality, and that's why they're buying Smithfield. If you read the reports in the Chinese press, the CEO is clear. He's buying supply chain management, integrity, technology, and scale. As to whether we should be worried about Chinese pork in general, I would simply say that 90% of the last 10 to 15 food recalls that represented significant health risk or death to humans in the United States came from domestic food production. So the Chinese food import business is certainly subject to bad PR, some of which is warranted, but most of which is not.
Some people, Patty, say that this is a national security issue, that this is going, obviously not to secure defense technologies or telecommunications technologies, but to a truly important national asset. It's easy to poke fun that they're just buying some pigs, but really they're buying agricultural production here. Are you worried about it as a national security issue?
Sure. I think we think the definition of national security should include how a country feeds itself, and this could lead to radical changes in the structure of our food system. And so we already have other meat companies that are owned by foreign companies. This is not the first one. This would be the first one where we have this Chinese presence, and there's been lots of evidence that this is not a place where our business relationships are always on equal footing as they should be, and we are very worried. The poultry industry already wants to import chicken from China. The costs of doing things there are so much lower, and we have to assume, we think it's a safe assumption, they will eventually get to that point with pork, and that is very worrisome. If you replace that kind of production, and put it in a foreign country, what are you missing if that production was cut off?
Patty seems worried, Rick, that Chinese product, Chinese pork, might work its way into the United States. You work with Chinese companies. My assumption is that Chinese food that comes into the United States would be subject to exactly the same standards of quality as the domestically produced stuff. And we already get shrimp, tilapia, other kinds of products from foreign sources, and I assume that they have to meet our standards too.
Well, it's true, but it's also true that foreign product is subject to higher standards. Importantly, from the standpoint of enforcement resource allocation at the ports of entry, only about 1.7% of products offered for import are subject to examination. So even if you multiplied that by a factor of 10, you would have 4 entries getting in without exam for every one that is examined. So to single out the Chinese is unfair. But from the standpoint of national security, it's certainly true that food infrastructure has an impact potentially on national security, and the congressional review that will ensue under the Foreign Investment National Security Act could, on the floor debate, use a populist approach to the definition of national security in a way to clog the proposed merger. But what I would simply say is this. You have a company in China with $100 billion in revenue last year buying a U.S. company with $5 billion in revenue. The Chinese firm is trying to recover their brand equity from some issues they had previously, and they're using Smithfield to do it. The idea that they would sacrifice that equity for short-term profit is nonsense, because the acquisition is relatively small compared to Shenghua's market size.
All right, folks, we have to leave it there. Patty Lovera of Food and Water Watch, thank you, and Rick Quinn of FDAimports.com. In a statement issued yesterday, we should point out, the company said Shenghui will continue its long-term strategy and vision to become a global leader with strict adherence to the highest standards of quality control and safety compliance. Its agreement to acquire Smithfield is fully aligned with this focus.